As President Donald Trump arrests and deports pro-Palestinian protesters, an organization known as Betar USA has apparently been advising him on who the targets should be. In fact, they've been compiling dossiers on students who have been too critical toward Israel, and they've been essentially sharing that information with administration officials. So let's get to the details on what this organization is and how they are essentially collecting this data and how often they're wrong about the individuals that they're targeting. So Betar USA is a New York-based organization. It's a self-described Zionist advocacy group with the motto, Jews fight back. It's somewhat similar to another organization known as Canary Mission. That's another pro-Israel group, but it's anonymously run, so they're a lot more secretive. And when it comes to Betar USA, the group began essentially monitoring student protests or students protesting Israel soon after the war on Gaza began. So they're known to post online the names, photos, and other information of non-American citizens, so students who are here with a green card or with a student visa, for instance. And essentially they draw attention to these protesters while in many cases making completely false claims about these individuals supporting Hamas or believing in radical Islam. Now, the organization, by the way, I should note, is so toxic that despite its pro-Zionism activism, even the Anti-Defamation League put it on a list of extremist and hateful groups.
Wow.
Yeah.
When you're pro-Israel, pro-Zionist, and the ADL puts you on an extremist list, you're extremist.
Yes.
And so meanwhile though, these guys are going around like a bunch of, you can use any words, I know some words will trigger you, but like Gestapo.
No, it's an accurate word.
Hey, we're documenting who's against the administration, and they don't mean the Trump administration, they mean the Israeli administration,
yes.
Right? And we're gonna make files on you guys, and then we're gonna take legal action. And here we are. And it wasn't an empty threat, so we'll get into whether it was definitely them or not, but the bottom line is the Trump administration is taking people that are actually on those lists, kidnapping them off the street with masked men, and then bringing them to Louisiana, and so far, none of them have actually been presented and had their day in court. No evidence has been presented.
No criminal charges.
No evidence presented against them. If there's no criminal charges, why are we holding them in Louisiana?
Yeah, maybe we're jealous of what the Israeli government does to Palestinians who haven't committed any crimes, but get detained and held without any charges for months and months at a time. Maybe that's what it is, I don't know. But Betar says it's been, by the way, let me just say, I don't know if it's the same word or if it means the same thing, but Betar in Armenian means worse. So every time I read the name of the organization, it's like, makes sense. Anyway, Betar says it's been telling the administration whom to look for and says it shared with the government a list of non-citizen protesters and activists it believes should be deported. It says the effort is in response to President Donald Trump's January executive order, which promised to combat anti-Semitism on college campuses. So Daniel Levy, who's a spokesperson for the organization, told CNN back in March that we submitted the names of hundreds of protesters and activists to the Trump administration and the Department of Homeland Security, urging ICE to deport them under the executive orders. And if you're wondering what that executive order stated specifically, well, the Trump administration basically states that the government could seek to deport non-citizen Hamas sympathizers, participants of pro-jihadist protests, and people accused of anti-Semitic acts. And the individuals who have been rounded up so far do not fall under any of those categories. At least we haven't seen a shred of evidence to indicate that they fall under those categories.
Yeah, but of course you guys know what Betar means. By pro-jihadist protest, they mean any protest of Israel. By anti-Semitic, they mean any criticism of Israel. By the way, they count saying that there should be an economic boycott of Israel as anti-Semitism. Wait, why is that? That's against the government and it's an economic boycott and it doesn't say anything about Jews. How is that anti-Semitic? Shut up, you can't ever criticize Israel. That's what I thought. That's what. But do you know that Israeli government officials, when the Palestinians went to the UN and asked for a state just like Israel did, use a diplomatic route, they said anti-Semitic. Because that word has no meaning anymore. So basically what this is saying is, it's loosey-goosey enough. Yeah, I think they're pro-jihadist. Oh, really? Show me something they said that's pro-jihadist or pro-Hamas. Or by the way, a couple of these guys literally argued against it. Mahmoud Khalil on national TV argued against anti-Semitism. He couldn't have been any clearer. But that proves their lie. This isn't about anti-Semitism, which by the way, is not illegal in America. Like, I hate it, it's terrible, you shouldn't do it, right? But the First Amendment allows you to hate anyone you like. And yes, the First Amendment applies to non-citizens. It applies to everyone in the US. The Supreme Court has ruled that for hundreds of years. But with Mahmoud Khalil, his only crime, and as far as we can tell with Turks, etc., is opposing Israel.
Opposing the way Israel is prosecuting this war in Gaza, which how could you not? How could you not, guys? I mean, it's just, I think that we are living in a very scary time when people within the borders of the United States, including PhD students, including green card carriers, okay, are being deported simply because they are critical of how the Israeli military is carrying out this war against, honestly, Palestinians in Gaza, right? I mean, they just flat out come out and say that they want to ethnically cleanse Gaza and take the land for themselves. So I'm sorry, we're not allowed to criticize that?
Yeah.
We're not allowed to criticize any human rights abuses that the Israeli government engages in. That's disgusting.
By the way, so wait, do Israeli supporters ever say Islamophobic things? I've seen tons and tons of examples of that. Not just Islamophobic statements, Islamophobic acts and violent acts. Right. The assault on peace protesters at UCLA, person who ran over somebody, or protesters at Columbia, etc. Isn't it amazing that at Columbia there was just one spectacular example of violence, but no one ever talks about it because it was a pro-Israel guy who ran over protesters with his car? Have you ever even heard that other than on this show?
Well, let's talk about that because there were pro-Israel protesters who confronted the student protesters who were speaking out against the Israeli government. And it turns out that one of those folks is the former executive director for Betar USA. His name is Ross Glick. He told CNN, our research, our information, the massive amount of video and photos that we have gathered, we create our dossiers and our reports, we hand them over, we make recommendations, meaning hand them over to Trump administration officials. He, by the way, had established the organization's research operation. He told CNN that they use facial recognition technology and AI after tipsters flag unidentified student protesters that they want to identify in order to recommend them for deportation. And his X page, by the way, is full of photos and videos, including footage of him confronting people at pro-Palestinian rallies.
So first of all, I don't know if anybody in the right cares, and it's a good, I'm sure some do, but the majority of the country, like, what are we doing here? So anti-Semitism gets you deported, if it's even true, which it isn't in most of these cases. But being bigoted against Muslims, oh no, it's totally fine. Nobody even cares. We're not investigating, there won't be any consequences. You can say the worst things in the world about Muslims, by the way, also about Christians, also about America. You could say terrible things about anyone and everyone except Israel. And they don't expect that people will be a little annoyed by that. They think, of course, Israel is the boss of you. So that is the one thing you are never allowed to criticize. But guys, we have eyes and ears. This is like them telling us Biden is young and dynamic. No, no amount of marketing and mainstream media saying it's no big deal is going to get you to a place where the majority of Americans are going to be like, oh yeah, we should be allowed to criticize America and Christians and Muslims and everyone else, but not Israel. If you do, round them up and deport them.
And look, to be fair, I have seen quite a few conservatives who are not okay with this, right? So for instance, there was a video of a rabbi that went viral, and the rabbi said, it's not good enough to not be anti-Semitic. You need to be anti-Semitic. Meaning like you need to be active in going after people that you have deemed anti-Semitic. And
in other words, it's not good enough to not criticize Israel. You have to be straight up their ass, and you have to kiss it on all sides. And if you're not kissing Israel's ass 24/7, we're gonna deport you because America 18th.
So, there are conservatives who are consistent in speaking out against some of the free speech violations in their view of anyone who said anything critical of other marginalized groups, right? And then they're turning around, they're looking at this, and they're like, this is the same thing, right? It's just a different group of people that are allegedly being protected. But this isn't even about protecting Jewish Americans at all.
At all.
I think it's important to make that distinction.
A lot of the peace protesters were Jewish. This is total BS.
Yeah, so let's talk about Mahmoud Khalil a little more, because there is some indication that this is the organization behind his arrest. Okay, so why do I think that? Well, Mahmoud Khalil, of course, was a prominent figure in last year's protests at Columbia University. In a filing against this detention, Khalil's lawyers noted Betar's claim it had submitted to the government the names of hundreds of activists it wanted deported. His lawyers also highlighted a January 29th X post from the organization that said Khalil was on our deport list. His lawyers also asserted the post falsely accused him of making inflammatory statements against Zionists. I've yet to see a single example, a single piece of evidence showing Khalil saying anti-Semitic things or inflammatory statements against Zionists. But by the way, even if he was saying something inflammatory against Zionism, again, his First Amendment rights would protect him from the government punishing him for it. But apparently those rights don't matter when Israel's feelings are hurt. Now, he has not been criminally charged at all, even though he's still being detained. And more importantly, a day before his arrest, he actually reached out to Columbia University's interim president for help and protection in an email. And in that email, he was talking about how he was being harassed, how he was being doxxed, how he was afraid, and that he needed protection. In the email, Khalil cited what his lawyers called a dehumanizing doxing campaign against him, according to court documents. I haven't been able to sleep, fearing that ICE or a dangerous individual might come to my home, Khalil wrote. Well, he made a mistake in thinking Colombia's interim president cared about him or wanted to do anything to protect him, because literally the day after, the Trump administration arrested him and then sent him off to Louisiana. Of course, there was that period of time where no one knew where he was. His lawyers couldn't get in touch with him. His wife, who's 8 months pregnant, couldn't get in touch with him. That's what we're dealing with here. And by the way, I'm gonna look into, I didn't have time today, but I wanna look into where these organizations get their funding.
Well, look, first of all, we're talking about money. Students on that list, they should sue Betar and Canary Mission, which is another organization that does this, into oblivion. If this isn't defamation, then the word defamation doesn't mean anything. I mean, this is a nuclear case of defamation with malice, and they're not even public figures, first of all. But even if you could argue that they were, Mahmoud Khalil and the other students were public figures, you'd have to show that they were lies about them. Well, they're saying that they support Hamas. When they don't support Hamas, that's an outrageous lie, right? And number two, you have to show bad intent in order to win if they're considered public figures. But here, they're practically advertising their bad intent.
Yeah,
right?
They are.
So that's point one. Point two is to Anna's point about the right wing. So mixed reaction. Some plenty of right wingers going, so what? They shouldn't be here in the first place. They don't have any rights. If you come to this country, you got to act right and be not be against this country. They weren't against this country.
I know.
They just made that up, guys. But they're not paying attention to that. On the other hand, Ann Coulter totally against it. Interesting.
Yep.
Joe Rogan, not fully right wing, but obviously supported Trump. Totally against it, right? And now he's not a right winger, but Bill Maher, as as pro-Israel as it gets.
Absolutely.
And by the way, shout out to him, credit to him. He was principled on this, and he was like, no, bad idea. This is definitely a violation of free speech. There you go.
You know why? Because he's not letting his pro-Israel bias distract him from the real issue at play here, which is freedom of expression and freedom of speech. The conservatives who are allowing their anti-immigrant bias to lead to them like missing the forest for the trees, it's a problem. Look, I don't agree with them on their anti-immigrant bias, but I think they should also focus on what the core of this issue is. It's not just about immigration, it's about people who are here legally being punished for their speech. And when you open up that can of worms, you have to consider you're opening up a can of worms for American citizens as well. And by the way, there's already examples from the past in which American citizens were punished for their free expression. For instance, there have been teachers in the state of Texas who were punished. Their contracts were not renewed simply because they're part of the boycott movement against Israel.
Not only that, at Columbia, they're putting in thought police in the Middle East department and saying anything you teach must be run by this Israel supporting lens, and through this guy who will literally cancel you and make you change your facts in the Middle Eastern program at an Ivy League university.
That's crazy.
Because Israel is not pleased, and Israel must be pleased with what's happening. It's insanity. Look, last thing on this is, guys, when you take Israel out and put any other country in, you instantly see how absurd it is, right? Imagine if there was a group collecting names on people who are anti-Canadian, right? Because like a lot of people attacked Canada when Trump did, and they should be the 51st state, and they're like taking pictures of you and writing down your name, and they're like, "We gotta deport these people." It sounds hilarious, right? I mean, of course. How about if Turkey's now in the middle of a kind of a informal coup where the president is arresting his political opponents? So if you criticize Turkey, imagine there's a group gobble gobble that goes around. "I got you on a list. I took your picture. Oh, you were against Turkey. You're getting deported from America." Everyone would laugh their ass off. They'd be like, "What the hell is this?" I don't care the guy is a student visa. By the way, student visas, one of the women was working on a PhD program. Wow, it sounds so dangerous. Imagine she wrote an op-ed criticizing the Turkish government instead of the Israeli government. And people said, "Oh, of course you should be kicked out. Turkey's a top ally, number 2 army in NATO."
It's crazy.
No one would agree to that because it's an obvious free speech violation on behalf of a foreign government.
Yep.
Putting in Israel doesn't make it any better at all. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.